Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift. Arguably one of the best films I saw as a teenager in the early 2000s, and it had such a massive impact on the car communities and Western culture. It was insane. People looked at that film for inspiration, mimicked and designed their cars off that, and it really kind of, I guess, opened the Pandora box for a lot of people. Now, there was a few bad things to that as well. You know, lots of people left the cinemas wanting to just reef the handbrake. But I would say that if you're a subscriber and you're watching my channel, that you've most likely seen that film and probably love it just as much as I do. Now, there are some things in the movie that are Hollywood and kind of made up, and there are some things that are a little bit truthful, and mainly the scenery is what's actually real about the movie. The rest of it's kind of Hollywood. But anyways, I want to show you guys some scenes and some of the most common questions that you guys actually ask me about. Is this right, or is that right, or is that true from the movie? So let's jump into the first, probably arguably the most popular question, and that's to do with, if you're doing over 190, will the police actually chase you?
Police cars are only factory tuned. You can do better than 180K, they can't catch you. So they don't even try.
Okay, so what we just saw was Sean driving the RX-7 with Han in the passenger seat, and they're on a highway that actually leads to the Tomei Expressway, which I actually drive on quite frequently. So that spot where the police officer sits is actually where a police station is. So it's actually really realistic, that scene. And a lot of people do sometimes get caught speeding past there. Now, what's really interesting is obviously Sean drives straight past him. They're doing 197, as it says on the radar gun, 197 kilometers per hour. The legal speed limit in Japan, this is where it's kind of a little bit iffy. On highways, if there's no speed sign, you're not supposed to go faster than 100 kilometers an hour. Generally, the police don't really care about people in the fast lane as long as they're not doing over 160. That's kind of what everyone says, but the law is the law. The law is no faster than 100 kilometers an hour, right? Now, anyways, Han says to Sean, oh, the police have factory tuned cars. They can't go over 180, so they don't even bother chasing you. Kind of some truth there, but mainly no. So let me explain what happens here in Japan. Now, if you're going over the speed limit and a police officer sees you and you're going really fast, he's not going to bother trying to chase you. That part is true. But technically he does chase you, because what he does is he radios in the car that he saw. So even if he doesn't know the model of the car, he just needs to know the time that you passed him and what color your car was, whether it was like a sedan, a van, or any of those basic details. And then they go and look at the CCTV footage of all of the highways and whatnot, and they find out what your number plate is, and because they can see it on the front or the back of your car. And then every car, their number plate is unique, which is then linked to a parking space, which you have to register with your car. Before you're allowed to register your car, you have to have a piece of paper from the police station registering your parking spot, and they're all linked together so the police know exactly where to go. They come to your house and they seize the car and arrest you. So kind of what you saw in the movie where the police rocked up and seized all the drift cars, that's kind of real. They're going to come and rock up, they're going to seize your car, and then the moment you get home, if you're not home, they will arrest you. They'll sit there and wait for you. And this is actually something that still happens today, and it's why a lot of people will actually just take their plates off or put like this kind of gum tape over their number plate, and they will just keep running from the police and hope they don't get caught. Now, obviously, the difficult thing with that is if ever they're on the highway at some point and someone matches up their car to a previous footage and you can see their number plate because it's not covered, then they will get caught, and that does happen. So you do still run a risk here when people do that, especially, the street drifters in Tokyo and whatnot. On that note, with police rocking up and arresting you by getting your number plate from CCTV cameras on the highway, is in the early 2000s, they didn't have those cameras, right? And this is kind of why there's so many of them, and how it all happened was because everyone was using the inner circle kind of highway that goes around Tokyo as like a time attack challenge track. And at nighttime, people were just going out there and smashing it, like the one gun kind of thing from the Devil's Ed Midnight movie, right? And it got so like popular that people were setting up timers and stuff, and there were, teams and stuff. It was crazy, right? People were just racing like it was a circuit. Anyways, the cops finally put cameras everywhere, and they just started arresting people left, right, and center, rocking up their house, seizing the car and arresting them. So that's kind of where I guess that all happened and started from, and why today no one really does that anymore on the highways here in Tokyo, because once you do more than a couple laps, they actually rock up on your doorstep and just, you know, give you a stern warning, or they arrest you depending on how fast you're going or how much you were breaking the law. So anyways, that's kind of interesting, and it's really, like, I hear about all those stories from, you know, like Oka-chan and anyone else involved in the drifting community. It's really interesting to hear those old stories from back in the day. The next scene that I want to talk about is the chase scene, where at the end of the movie, before Han dies, you see them drifting through the main scramble, or the Shibuya crossing. So let's take a quick look at that.
Sean!
Now what you just saw was Sean smashing on the horn, trying to get people out of the way, and then he drifts through. Then you see Han and the DK follow behind them. They don't hit anyone. And as you're watching the scene, I think compared to today's like CG, looking at it, you can definitely tell that something's been CG'd there. And the truth is everything was kind of CG'd there. That entire scene never was actually shot. And I think the only real shot is probably the main bird's eye scenery shot, and then they CG'd the car moving through. So it's really interesting, actually. The Japanese government was really strict on giving them permission for closing down roads. In fact, all the highway scenes that you saw in the movie were all shot in only a 1 hour period. They were given permission to shoot on that one section of the highway that they were allowed to shoot on. So it's kind of interesting. The Japanese government was really strict with them. But obviously all the other scenes that they shot, like I think there was a scene in Chiba, Shinjuku, and definitely around the Shibuya kind of area as well. It was really interesting. But yeah, all in all, that entire drift scene through the main Shibuya crossing or the scramble was entirely CG'd and fake. The next scene we're going to take a look at is, I guess, the drift learning scene. Now, we're kind of going all over the place in the movie, but this is just the order I wanted to go to because there's a nice little Easter egg at the end of this scene. So let's take a quick look at it.
There's no wax on, wax off for drifting. Learn by doing it. The first drifters invented drifting out here in the mountains by feeling. So feel it.
Alright, so what you just saw were two parts of the one scene where Sean's learning to drift, and I took the middle out so we could put the two together because they're the two scenes I want to talk about. The first scene is Han takes Sean out into the mountains and says that drifting was initially invented out in the mountains by Japanese people just kind of feeling it and whatnot, and you know, encourages Sean to do the same thing, and Sean then has to keep repeating it over and over again to get better. Now, that one quote that he says about, you know, drifting being invented in the mountains, this is something that I guess a lot of people quote a lot and say and think it's true. And it is true, it definitely is. Probably one of the longest people that's been involved in the drifting community in Japan that knows a lot about it is Keiichi Tsuchiya-san. Now, there is a bit of controversial kind of information about him though. So everyone knows him as the DK, the Drift King, right? And you know, he talks about how, I think in some interviews, he even says that he was the first one to start drifting and stuff in the mountains and he invented it. But what's really interesting is if you ask a whole bunch of D1 drivers that are retired and have been around either longer than him or around the same age as him, what's really consistent is that yes, it did start in the mountains, a whole bunch of young people, and it just naturally kind of happened, and then the group started and things like that, very similar to Initial D. And no one knows who did it first though, right? There were arguments and people claiming and whatnot, but the fact is no one knows who actually started doing it first. And what's really interesting actually is, you know, with Tsuchiya-san is that if you actually dig a lot deeper into him himself, there's a lot of controversial information about, you know, his status as the DK and him saying that he started it and all this stuff. And it seems like a lot of people just say he's an actor and an entertainer. Yes, he's a good driver, but he's not actually the real DK. And it's very interesting how in the Japanese kind of community, I guess, in that area of that era, that kind of age group, how they all seem to not really like him too much. But anyways, that's all controversial. Let's not talk about that. Let's move on to the next scene, which actually involves Tsuchiya-san. You see those two Japanese guys sitting there. Now, the first guy that you see, the kind of bigger guy that's facing the camera, he's actually a really famous Japanese director. I can't remember his name. I do have it here on the screen really quickly. It is Wadakura-san. So Kozutoshi Wadakura-san. It's hard to remember that name. So he's a famous producer and director for Japanese films. And then obviously the person next to him is none other than Tsuchiya-san, the DK, as people know him. And what's really interesting was Tsuchiya-san was actually more involved in the movie than a lot of people think. He was a stunt driver and he did a lot of the stunting shots and whatnot. And actually, if you slow the film down, you can see him in the driver's seat in some of the scenes with the Evo on those mountain roads when Sean's training and practicing. And he managed to get that cameo and sit in the movie for that shot, which I think is really kind of cool because, you know, he's this old guy there. And if you knew who he was, it's like, you know, the comedy there is really cool. What else is interesting is old mate from Team Orange. He did a lot of stunt driving in the film as well. So it's kind of cool, like all those old school kind of guys from D1 all were doing stunt driving for the film. So I really like that. That's kind of cool. And not many people actually know that. Not many people actually know that that person in the film is Tsuchiya-san. Oh my gosh. For some reason, I really struggle saying Tsuchiya. Anyways. So yeah, it's kind of, we've gone through a few myths. We've talked about a few things in the movie and maybe a controversial thing about Tsuchiya-san's status as the DK. But anyways, it's all good. It's all fun. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope that answers probably the number one question everyone asked me is about the police and the speed thing. So I'm glad that's all cleared up and I can reference to this video now for all those people. But guys, thanks heaps for watching. Once again, make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe. Hit up all my social media down in the description. If you want to send me slap stickers or anything for mail time videos, my PO box is now there. I can't wait to start getting some things from you guys. And I guess that wraps up it. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Ja mata ne!